Welcome back to the Drowned City spoiler wrap-up. I'm rather Incoherent, and today we'll be covering the last of the Survivor leaks. We'll get started with Profane Idol, a one-cost accessory slot asset that's an item and a charm. It can only be played from your discard pile. Forced, when it's defeated, shuffle it into your deck instead of discarding it. What's it do? It has 3 Horror Soak. So it's up 1 Horror from Cherished Keepsake in exchange for costing 1 more resource, and you can discard it freely to fuel all your discard shit, unlike a Cherished Keepsake. This card is just obviously really, really good. It's worth noting that there is no health equivalent to this like Leather Coat, and with George Barnaby being like the premier discard guy, having equal health and horror split, it might be a thing where you're playing George, you want to do like 2 horror when you're in the thick of it to make better use of Profane Idol, but maybe that's too risky in terms of like needing to hit specifically the Profane Idol. I don't know. I'm always a little bit scared of cards like this on equal split investigators where like, if I'm running a shitload of Horror Soak with no plan for health, it creates a problem. Realistically, I'm mostly playing devil's advocate. Profane Idol solves horror damage, and that does create the problem of, all right, what about health damage? You do need to solve the other half of the puzzle, but that does not take away from the fact that this is a one-stop shop for a discard deck to never die to horror damage, which is absolutely wild. This is some of the best soak available in the game, and it is a compelling reason to care about discarding shit. Next up, we've got Catch, a 0-cost tactic trick event. As an additional cost to play Catch, choose and discard an item asset that takes up at least 1 hand slot from your hand or play area. Evade. You get plus X foot for this evasion attempt, where X is the chosen asset's printed resource cost. If you succeed against a non-elite enemy and that asset was in your play area, that enemy does not ready during the next upkeep phase. So this is a 0-cost event that is going to give you, let's assume you're using some of the new stuff, the like nautical charts, that sort of thing. It's a 0-cost event that gives you plus 3 to an evade attempt, and against non-elite enemies, it double evades them. If that came from your play area and not your hands, because you're able to choose. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think I care about this at all. I look at this as a way to convert a spent asset into a guaranteed success evasion attempt that lasts for 2 turns. And even in that context, I'm like, I'd rather run a different card. I'd rather run something that's better for evading multiple times, or I'd rather run something that deals with the enemy, or I'd rather run draw to get to my other options. I don't look at Catch and see a thing I want to do. I don't understand. When it comes to evading is something I don't like doing as a game plan. It's not something I sit down and I want to evade, guys. Evading is at its best when it's giving you other benefits, which is to say with rogue plans where you're pickpocketing spamming, and you're actually using evading as a resource engine, or it's at its best when it's an option. You don't want to come into a scenario and plan to evade every enemy. But if you come into a scenario and you plan to find all the clues, and if you happen to need to deal with an enemy, you can evade them, that is very good. Evading is a fantastic option, but a terrible plan. It's not an all-encompassing solution. So when I look at a card like Catch, where I specifically need to discard an item asset from play from my hand slot to deal with a non-elite enemy, I'm just adding so many criteria as something that's best as a Swiss Army knife, and I don't want that. That's not how I approach evading in the game at all. I don't know that this is a good card in any capacity. This could be me generally being down on evade, but I look at this and I just don't see it at all. Next up, we have Unconventional Method, another 0-cost event, Insight and Tactic, and this might look a little bit familiar. As an additional cost to play Unconventional Method, choose and discard an item asset that takes up at least 1 hand slot from your hand or play area. Investigating, however, is much better than dodging, so let's give it a shot. Investigate, you get plus X booked for this investigation, where X is the chosen asset's printed resource cost. If you succeed and that asset was in your play area, discover 1 additional clue at your location. So this is a way to convert a used up resource into an extra clue. So ideally, you convert a resource that you've used up into a clue. Unfortunately, the best resource that comes to mind, old keyring, self-discards. I'm not gonna discount Unconventional Method the way I did Catch, because getting an extra clue is actually a pretty compelling reason to discard an item asset. The issue is that item asset had value, you chose to play it. Unless it had a limited number of resources that you expended, it's not that great. The fact that it needs to be a hand slot removes options like Matchbox. The fact that it needs to come from your play area means you can't just use this as a discard enabler. You're either getting the clue or discarding. And to some degree that's flexibility, but realistically, I just want to use this for the extra clue. There are better repetitive ways of getting discards. I don't want to be using this. I don't think this is a bad card. but I don't think it makes the cut. I think the opportunity cost in decks these days is wild. The average card quality in any deck is capable of being so high that I just don't think this makes the cut. I don't think it's bad. I just think that there are probably better things I can be doing with my time. If it turns out I'm wrong, I won't be surprised. Getting an extra clue on a 0-cost event, yeah, that's obviously good. I'm blanking on the item asset I use that runs out of charges and gets turned into this, because like, if it's not running out of charges, I probably want to just keep the asset in play. Feel free to just tell me in the comments what the item that goes here is and I'm forgetting. Right now, I'm thinking this is at its best in a weird flex deck and you're using like a gun, right? You're getting rid of like a 45 automatic in Yorick. And then this gives you +4 book, you crush the test, you get 2 clues. Like this is really cool in flex Yorick when you're playing a flex character with fighting assets that run out of charges. Suddenly this gets a lot better. But in a traditional Clover, I don't think this makes the cut. In flex, I think it's interesting and it's possibly very, very good. I'm looking forward to cooking with this. I think it's a good card. I think people have fun playing with it. I don't know how good it actually is, and it will be different in different decks by a lot. You can definitely build decks where this is dog shit, and you can build decks where this is one of the best cards in the deck. The real question for me is, when I build that deck, that crazy flex Yorick, where this is one of the reasons to play the deck, was that actually a good deck? Should I have built that deck? I know I can build the deck where this shines. I just don't know if the deck where this shines is a good deck in the first place. Next up, we have Contemplative, which is one of the big wins of this set, I feel like. It is a 0 experience skill, commits for nothing, and 8. You may commit it to an investigation or skill test during a parlay attempt at your location, or a connecting location. If this test is successful, the performing investigator discovers 1 clue at their location. Weirdness in the phrasing. You may commit Contemplative to an investigation test or a skill test during a parlay attempt. It does not need to be an investigation during a parlay, that's not a thing. It's just a little bit clunky in the wording. So this is basically long shot. Rather than committing to evades, it commits to parlays, but the vast majority of the time, neither commits to the secondary thing. You commit long shot to a punch test, you commit Contemplative to an investigate test. This gives you no icons, but if you pass in spite of that, you get an extra clue. This is basically red deduction. Deduction's a really good card. Now, red characters typically have worse book, harder times passing checks. They value that book that's on deduction that you're not getting on Contemplative even more. Is this worse than deduction? Yes, it's worse than deduction in a way that is more important to the characters that are getting access to it than it was on the characters that had deduction. Totally true. It's still deduction though. It's still a clue. When you put this in your deck, you realize that you are playing, you have higher numbers, you build your deck around that. This is a very, very good card. I'm talking way too long to convince you that deduction's good, but I do want to make it clear that this is not just deduction, it is meaningfully worse, but it's still incredible. Next up, Glimmer of Hope got a 2 experience upgrade. As a myriad card, it's only 2 for all 3 of them, and the full upgrade, it took me embarrassingly long to figure out what changed. It got this question mark. So now when you're using your Glimmers of Hope the first time, they're committing for Unexpected Courage during the Mythos phase. So when you get them back, you're getting back 3 copies of Unexpected Courage instead of, basically garbage. So yeah, I like Glimmer of Hope's upgrade. I think this is transparently good in a way where I never thought Glimmer of Hope was actually that good. And last up, we have an upgrade for Last Chance. It is now 3 experience. I had to double check, I wasn't 100% sure. It gains an extra question mark. It's now 6 question marks, just like anything you can do better. But the more important upgrade is this last line of text. If this test is successful while Last Chance is committed to it, draw 2 cards. Survivor already had a pretty damn good draw. There are a lot of tests you can find yourself taking where you have like 3 to 4 cards in hand. This still commits for 2 to 3 question marks and draws 2 cards. It's just a really fucking good skill. When I mentioned with Nodens that I didn't think there were any cards that were that insane, I think I phrased it badly. Some people called me out in the comments like I was making it sound like a bad card. What I meant is Nodens being 5 experience, I want insane shit to build around, right? If it's just giving me a draw engine with stuff like Resourceful and Data Crossroads and Unrelenting, that's good. But for 5 experience, usually I'm building a draw engine to get that card and win the game, not just to draw through my deck a little bit faster. The stuff that you get that is generally powerful is stuff like Sharp Vision and Brute Force that is directly giving you more damage, more clues. And there aren't that many skills doing that sort of stuff. There's certainly nothing like Eye of Truth. And Last Chance does unfortunately fall in the prior category of just being good because it draws cards. And that, at this point, Nodens is probably the best draw engine in the game, right? You can run Unrelenting, Last Chance, Resourceful, Take Heart, and At a Crossroads, and use Nodens to just tear through these cards and give yourself like better than Seeker levels of draw at that point, probably. You can build some ludicrously high draw decks in Survivor. Having this as another option is great. I don't know that this is a compelling reason to run Nodens. I think Nodens is good. I'm just wondering what I'm drawing towards. Like, my Survivor decks are already rock solid consistency. I don't know that I want to like build a deck to cycle Contemplative with Nodens, but I will say having Contemplative in the deck makes Nodens a lot better. Like, this is honestly more interesting to me from the perspective of enabling Nodens as a resource generator than any other skill that Survivor has. Even stuff like Sharp Vision is just directly comparable to Contemplative. I think Nodens is good enough now. I think building a skill-based Nodens deck is sick as hell at this point because you're gonna find what you need. You've got Last Chance, you've got all of these draw cards, you're gonna hit it. Then you have both Contemplative and Sharp Vision for value cycling. With 4 skills that give you clues in your deck, you're gonna be able to use that most turns on Nodens, I think. Contemplative, the additional skill here, is what you really need. Last Chance is just a card I'm glad's in the deck. Like, this is a cool card. I can see myself buying this actually fairly frequently. At 6 question marks, you're still gonna get these question marks with a real hand of cards, and draw 2 cards is a massive effect. I don't know if I think this is a bells and whistle or an early buy. It depends on what character I'm playing, I think. There are some characters that are so strong off the rip, they can go straight for this. Like, if you were playing Daryl and you wanted to go Last Chance immediately, I would question why, but your level 0 deck will work just fine in the 5th scenario of the game, so you can. And that's basically what it comes down to. If your level 0 deck is strong enough, then you can go for things that seem like bells and whistles for consistency much earlier. I think Last Chance is very good. I can see getting this before 30 experience in a lot of characters, and for basically every Survivor, I'm looking at this late in the campaign. So on a whole, how do I feel about Survivor? Well, initially I saved them for last because I was the most hyped for Survivor. Having thought about all the cards substantially more going through the leaks and doing these roundups, it's pretty close for me at this point. Mystic has a lot of really hype, powerful new stuff coming out, but Survivor to me is still the winner. First of all the investigators, George Barnaby seems like the coolest. He threatens to be like Amanda. I don't think he's gonna be anywhere near that good, but he's a very fast, very high tempo character playing a new archetype to a very high level of efficacy. I could be grossly overestimating him. Maybe I'm gonna throw him right in the dumpster at the bottom of D tier, but I'm pretty sure that what he's promising he can deliver, and that he's gonna be playing a very, very strong discard deck. He can be played as pure Clover, and with this 3/5 and the cards available to him, he can play a pretty mean flex deck actually. It turns out 3/5 is just more than enough when you're getting a bonus from the fact you're using a weapon, and then +2 because you're using Cornered because you're playing George Barnaby. 6 is a great number. That's where most fighters are looking to get to, and George can get there with only 1 card. Like, Cornered is not a big ask for this deck to hit. So I like George. I like George a lot. I wouldn't play him as main fighter, but I think he's sufficient as flex and good as Clover, and I don't know where he'll fall. I'm gonna have to do a lot of cooking with George. I'm very interested in him. And coming into the cards we got, yes, there were some real misses for me. Handhook is just a complete failure of a card. This is not something I will ever put in any deck. I might play it once in a standalone to prove a point, but this is a bad card. There is no upgrade, there is no payoff, this is a mistake. Anchor Chain, on the other hand, it is actually a good evasion card. If you want to run a card to evade guys, getting +1 evasion built in, as I mentioned during the rogue review, is a big deal. Double evading is actually valuable. If you're playing a discard archetype, discarding can be upside. We have seen cards that do that. Cards like Glimmer 2 that have no real cost. Cards like Profane Idol. There are enough reasons to be fine with discarding that I think Anchor Chain is viable. I don't think it's bad. Now that said, I don't think this is something you should build to do. As I've mentioned before, it is best to dodge as an option. It is not best to dodge just as your whole game plan, and it kind of is your whole game plan once you're talking about running 3-cost hand assets to evade for multiple turns. This is too much commitment. This is not a Swiss Army knife. This is a mistake in my eyes. I want to be able to evade sometimes. I do not want to commit this hard to that option though. In no small part, the reason I'm so down on Anchor Chains and Handhook is because Nautical Charts was the first one we saw, and it is an absolute banger. This same effect, but using the discard to get an additional clue, is so much more valuable than 1 damage on an exhausting weapon or a double evade on non-elite enemies. This is Mariner's Compass tier powerful, and possibly much better than that just because the discard archetype might have a lot more going for it than the Dark Horse archetype does. During this review, I've mentioned you would need a lot of book to make red deduction work. Contemplative, that's its name. And in that regard, we have an ally for it. Lawrence Carlisle, 3 cost, bad soak. That's unfortunate, but he gives +1 book, and he fits into that discard archetype beautifully. Reaction, after you discard a card, exhaust Lawrence, gain a resource. He's just very, very good. He's red Milan. I mean, sure, he needs to be in specifically discard, but he's red Milan. He's very strong. We've seen Profane Idol and Catch already. Very high on one of these, not so much the other. Scrolling down till we get to some more cards we haven't seen today. Ample Supplies is not good discard support. Thankfully, there's already a great piece of resource economy in the discard archetype, and Survivor is generally cheap. You don't need Ample Supplies. But Ample Supplies, like so many resource overtime cards, just isn't very good. There's just not a lot of reason to want this over an Emergency Cash, and Emergency Cash is the baseline, not the gold standard. So, yeah. Good Weather's a card I'm personally not super hot on, but I appreciate that it is a transparently good card. Improvised Weapon is a very good upgrade to that card. I'm a bit sad that we didn't see like something similar coming out for Winging It, and I would actually go so far as to say the fact that there's not an upgrade for Winging It is one of the reasons that I feel like this expansion wasn't necessarily printed with the intention of going into a standard rotation. I'll cover that more when we really talk about standard, but not having Winging It come out alongside George Barnaby the way Improvised Weapon did feels really weird to me if we're about to rotate Winging It out of the game. But back on track, Improvised Weapon itself is just a fantastic upgrade, making it both more accurate and building draw into it. And then Gift of Nodens is kind of the big hit for Survivor, the big thing you might want to build around. I think with Contemplative, it gets there for Cloovers. I'm not sure there's enough fight-based skills for you to really care about this in a fighter, but the ability to just turn any card in your hand into a skill in your discard pile is kind of crazy when you have 4 copies of Deduction and 8 copies of Draw 2. Like, Gift of Nodens does have enough support with Contemplative being added. I'm looking forward to playing somebody built around Gift of Nodens in the Clooving category. It looks really fun. So going through, we've got more draw going into one of the best draw classes. We've got a great build around for red characters at high experience, some upgrades to old standbys, some good cards that fit into really anyone, a lot of support for the discard archetype, some very good clue finding cards with Contemplative, Profane Idol being some of the best soak in the game, although not even the best soak in this expansion thanks to Spectral Shield stealing its thunder a little bit. Some really powerful discard stuff with Lawrence and Nautical Charts, not so much with Anchor Chain and Hand Hook though. And George stands out to me as my favorite investigator from the set, at least from a theory perspective. We'll have to see how it plays on reality. But yeah, I feel like Survivor is kind of made out like Bandits. There's a lot to like with what Survivor's got. Do I wish they got more? Yeah, I do. They already won the expansion. It's greedy as shit, but I really wish Hand Hook had been a better fighting asset. I really wish there'd been a little bit more to like enable this set if you don't have Cornered. But even though there's stuff I would have wanted in addition to this, I'm very happy with what we got. I'll be salty till the end of time about Hand Hook being possibly one of the worst fighting cards in the game when I thought it was going to save Survivor fighters. But beyond that, no, Survivor's won the expansion. Mystics are a close second, but Survivor's got so much out of this expansion, there's gonna be a lot of red cards on my top 10 list. Anyways, that'll be all for now. I've been rather Incoherent. Thank you for your time. If you made it this far, then please do hit all the buttons below. It boosts the channel up in the algorithm, helps the channel grow. Really do appreciate it. And I also cannot overstate my gratitude towards the people who support this channel, both as members on YouTube and as patrons over on Patreon. Thank you all for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.